The problem is 80% of them are not financially free. 80% of them make millions of dollars, but they're still, if they stop, they go broke, right? They might have lots of money too, but eventually they run out of money because they don't have their money working for them. They're constantly working for the next deal and reinvesting the profits they make to keep building bigger and bigger and bigger, but there's never a stopping point. That's transactional wealth. Passive wealth says, hey, even if I stop working, I'm okay.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash that like button and click subscribe. For those of you listening on a podcast platform, be sure to subscribe on whatever platform that is and leave us a rating if you can. The more likes, ratings, and subscriptions that we get, the more we can spread the message and grow our community. So we also have a free Facebook group. It's called the Average Joe Finances Network. Check us out, join the group, join the community, ask questions, and become a part of the team. All of our other social media accounts are listed in our flow page, and we have them in the video or podcast description below. Hey, how's it going, everybody? So today I have with us Chris Miles. So Chris, he was going to start talking to us about building an anti-financial plan. And that might sound a little weird on this channel, but I think you guys are going to really enjoy what he has to say when we talk about it, okay? Chris Miles, he's the cash flow expert, and he's the anti-financial advisor, which is he's a leading authority in teaching entrepreneurs and professionals how to get their money working for them today. So he's also an author, a podcast host of the Chris Miles Money Show, and he's been featured in U.S. News, CNN Money, EOFire, has a proven reputation with his company, Money Ripples. So he gets his clients fast, life-altering financial results. And in fact, his personal clients have increased their cash flow by over $200 million in the last 10 years. So Chris, I am really excited to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey man, it's such a pleasure. We're gonna have a lot of fun here, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to start things off first by asking you a little bit about yourself. So I gave you a small intro, but what can you tell me about yourself, and can you share your story with us?
Yeah, like I started out like most people, right? Going to college, I was like the first person in my family to go to college. I was about to get my bachelor's in sociology and with a plan to become a business consultant. But as I got close to that, I thought, well, if I'm going to be a business consultant, shouldn't I have real life business experience? So I dropped out of college with one course to go, right? Actually, one paper to write. It wasn't even a course. Dropped out, became an entrepreneur. The first job that became available, or the first business became available, was becoming a financial advisor. Because little did I know at the time, they take anybody who can pass the test, right? So I didn't know it was that easy to get in. So I became a financial advisor, purely commission only, and I actually loved being an entrepreneur. And so I stayed, dropped out of college. I didn't go back. And for the next 4 years, I worked as that mainstream traditional salesman in a suit, right? Where I'm telling you to save everything, spend nothing, save it forever, save it for the long haul. And someday you might be able to retire on something, right? And what ended up happening, of course, is that after those 3 or 4 years, I started to look at real evidence. Like I started to look at people that I even inherited from other financial advisors from decades of experience, and finding out that, guess what? They weren't financially free. And I had this dilemma, right? Because I'm like, well, do I put in the real numbers of the stock market and the real inflation numbers or not? Because everybody lies about the inflation and the stock market numbers, right? Like they're completely bogus. For example, they tell you, we were always telling people that the stock market returns 10 or 12% a year. But in truth, the actual yield is closer to about 7 to 8% a year, right? And so, when you start throwing in those numbers, you're like, ooh, I got to save more money. But then you're like, wait, inflation's not 2 or 3%. It's actually like 5, 6, 7+% a year. Oh, crap. Now I've got to save 100,000 plus a year so I can retire on a middle-class lifestyle, right? And it got depressing. So I started like trying to, use more quote unquote conservative numbers so that people wouldn't get depressed. And lo and behold, that's when, the students ready to teacher appears, right? And I remember one of the guys that trained to be a financial advisor left, started doing real estate investing with his dad. And after 4 months, he said, Chris, like life is awesome. Like my dad's just doubled his income as a professor at the local university. And I said, bull crap. That's too good to be true, right? As you hear, everybody say, especially in real estate. And so I was like, there's no way. And he's like, it's happening. The numbers are there. And we got in this debate about what's better stock for real estate, right? And finally, he said, Chris, how many of your clients are financially free where they don't worry about money? Not just the ones that are retired, but they're not worried about money. I said, well, none. Because even the retired ones, right? Like even the retired doctors would still watch CNN, and you can never be financially free watching CNN, right? So that wasn't the case. He's like, all right, well, how many of you guys as financial advisors are financially free, not from the commissions that you've been earning, but actually from doing these mutual funds and these investments? And I said, well, none. I'm like, maybe this one guy is. And I found out he wasn't either later on. He's like, there's your problem. If it hasn't been worked yet, why would you do it? And I said, all right, well, I'm listening. Tell me the answer. He's like, I won't tell you the answer. I'm like, dadgummit, tell me the freaking answer. Like, you got me to admit this, right? 4 years being a financial advisor, that's like a million years in the financial advising business, And so he finally just said, all right, you're serious? Go get this book by Robert Kiyosaki called Who Took My Money, which rips into mutual funds, and go and listen to this radio show. It was, AM radio days before podcasts. Listen to this radio show with these two real estate investors. And so I did. And that was January of 2006. I started doing that. March of 06, I said, I'm done. I will never teach about money again. I can't be in integrity and teach this stuff anymore, right? So I was done. I will just teach ballroom dancing, and I'll be a mortgage broker. So that's what I did. A little known fact, I was one of the nation's top amateur ballroom dancers, right? So, but as time went on, I started getting mentored by these guys. And later that summer, I was able to retire myself. I was 28 years old and I was financially independent. I was able to just stop working. And that blew my mind, right? And then was like, well, what do I want to be when I grow up? And that's kind of when I came out of out of retirement in 2007 and started teaching people how to do this stuff.
That is some story, some background. Some of the things you talked about, the stock market, right? When we talk about it, we say on average it's a 12% return, where in actuality, it's really a 7% return. You're saying inflation realistically is between 5 and 7%. So what are you doing really? It's like putting your money in a savings account. Well, I mean, at least you're keeping up, right? You're barely keeping up with inflation, but it's almost like that whole thing that financial advisors tell you not to do by putting your money in just in savings,
right?
And you're not keeping up with inflation. Whereas putting in the stock market in mutual funds or index funds like that, it sounds like you are barely just going to keep up with inflation at the current inflation rate, right?
That's right.
I have not read that book by Robert Kiyosaki yet. I've read, his other book, the very popular one that most real estate investors read, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. But that's definitely going to go on my list for sure. And that's wild. So what did you do differently? What did you change up to get yourself to be able to retire? What was the catalyst that got you into financial freedom?
Yeah, I had to shift my mindset in every way that I viewed money, right? That was the biggest thing. That was the hardest thing, especially with a guy that was entrenched in that belief and was promoting that belief of really, it's really an accumulation mindset, right? When you think about it, it's save up as much money as you can, so then you can live on less than the interest, really, right? So that you don't, lose to inflation. It's an interesting point. Like a lot of times, like I've heard people talk about FIRE, right? And like how to be financially independent and living on 4%, But a lot of people talk about the 4% rule. Well, that was a great rule in the 1970s when they did the whole Monte Carlo simulations, right? But since then, people have lived longer and interest rates have dropped drastically, especially in the bond markets and things like that. Now, and especially I noticed in the last 10 to 15 years, even when I was about the time I exited, we were even starting to question the 4% rule, right? So really, if you have to live on either 2 or 3% a year, this changes everything. You've got to have at least 35 to 50 times the number you want to live on. And given that new number of inflation, now that number just goes higher and higher, right? And so it's like a Dalmatian chasing a fire truck. And again, that accumulation mindset, I was just thinking, hey, by the time I'm 40, if I save $2 million, live on 3%, that's $60,000 a year. I've made it, right? Because back in 20 years ago, $60,000 a year seemed awesome to me. Now $60,000 a year, I couldn't even survive on that. Like that's so low of a number, especially with 8 kids, right? But now,
how many?
8.
Wow.
So
good on
6
you.
of my own. My wife brought 2 from her previous marriage. So we have this blended Brady bunch. type of thing, but we don't even have room for Alice because it's just
Well, speaking of blended, you ever watch that movie? It's a great movie.
blended.
Yes.
Is that the name of the movie? I've never heard of that. No.
It's about blended families. It's got I think it's Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore. Yeah, they always do great
Oh yeah.
movies together. Go check it out.
I got to check that out now.
It's
Yeah.
hilarious.
We're living it.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, that's a big family though. It definitely got to change your lifestyle for that.
But yeah, that's the thing is like you have to try to save up so much and you're chasing inflation too, right? And so it's like it's running away from you at the same time. And so the mindset I had to switch was it's not about accumulation, it's about acceleration and cash flow, right? How does it really create income for me? And it started to open up when I started to hear from guys that were in real estate investors because someone would lend their money at 2% a month, 24% a year. I'm like, wait, you're doing bank lending of your money to these people, like doing hard money loans or whatever for these deals. And I started doing the math, right? Because I remember trying to tell my dad, like trying to get him to retire because remember, he was actually he would be like the Dave Ramsey poster child. He paid off his house early. He's saving his 401k and everything, right? Totally debt free, but he wasn't free. And that's the thing with Dave Ramsey is you cannot become financially free off of Dave Ramsey's advice. It just doesn't work. You can get to the point of budgeting, and he does good stuff with that. But if you want to truly have financial freedom, he falls short. Even my wife, who's one of his advisors, right? Same thing. She saw that same problem. It was like, wait a minute, there's some things missing here for people to actually become financially free.
For a lot of people, I think it's a great starting point, right?
Mm-hmm.
For if you have a lot of debt. So I did the Dave Ramsey baby steps to get out of debt. After that,
right,
I was like, okay, this isn't going to work anymore. And that's, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and realized that there's other things to do with my money than just store it all in savings because
that's right.
It's not doing anything for me there. So I just want to point out, it's not that Dave Ramsey's necessarily giving out bad advice. It's just that it's a great way to get started to, eliminate your debt. Then after that, you have to start looking at different avenues of vehicles to put your money into to, build that passive income for yourself.
Right. Yeah. It's incomplete. I mean, even though he has this different, 6 steps that gets you to freedom, right? The thing is, even with those 6 baby steps, that really you should stop at after about 3.
Exactly. That's exactly where I stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So once I was consumer debt free, I said, okay, we're done with this. Yeah. Now it's time to move on to something else.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the key thing, right? Is that because I see people that all the time, they're making hundreds of thousands a year. They are not people he's talking to. If you really look at the people his market, they're usually people making 30 to 40,000 a year, barely can make ends meet, right? And so debt to them would be destructive. It would be horrible. And again, he's looking more from that average Joe standpoint, right? But you're right. Like once you try to go into the investing world, don't listen to him. Like, saving your 401ks and mutual funds, like he keeps talking about, has not worked. And my dad was proof of that. He was the kind of pre-baby boomer, prime lifer, right? But he did all that, saved his 401k religiously, debt-free, could not retire. And I remember meeting with him as a traditional advisor, right? And he's saying, he's like, well, what can I do? And I said, well, hopefully you die in 5 years, and you'll probably run out of money in the stock market. So well, I don't want you to sell your house. So I guess you could take out a mortgage and cash out money out of your home. He's like, I just paid it off. I'm like, yeah, but that's not all you got. He's like, all right, well, if I cash it out, where would I invest it to make the money? I said, well, with anything I offer as a financial advisor, I can't really guarantee anything because you got to make at least at that time, mid 2000s, 6% rate of return to beat the interest rate, right? And I was at a loss. But then when all of a sudden I realized, wait, you can invest this in real estate and make more cash flow than the payment. You can create profit from nothing. Now it can make sense as long as you're doing it right. That's the key thing is that I see some people doing real estate. They're like, especially because I'm in a Facebook group, where, people talk about, retiring, basically the whole FIRE method, right? And they're like, yep, I did it. I'm doing it right now. And, I'm living cheap and I'm trying to get my income up. And I'm like, hey, here's the thing is that, you can do real estate. They're like, oh, there's that person talking about real estate again. Like, why do they keep talking about real estate? I'm like, because it works. Like, well, I did it and it was horrible. I'm like, if you don't know what you're doing, it's horrible, right? But I love buying turnkey real estate properties. If you ask me the question, like, what do you invest in, Chris? One of my favorite places to invest is buying turnkey real estate, where I don't manage the property at all.
That actually is a question I was going to ask you. So what are you investing in, Chris?
Yeah, turnkey real estate investing is one of the
Right
big
on.
ones, right? Because I love passive income. I go for a
So
goal of at least 12% cash on cash return.
let's take a quick break from today's episode to hear from our show sponsors. Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Mike Cav with Average Joe Finances. You know, we're living in some pretty tough times right now, and if you don't have life insurance, you should probably get it. You need to protect yourself, protect your family, and protect what you own. Check out the link below in the show notes or in the video description. Hey, what's going on everybody? It's Mike Cav from Average Joe Finances. Just want to talk to you today about Prep Agent. If you're interested in learning how to become a real estate agent and being able to pass the test on your first try, check out Prep Agent. Check out the link below in the show notes or in the video description. Welcome back, everybody. Let's get back into it. Yeah, so that's curious to me, right? Because a lot of
Yeah.
people that invest in real estate tend
Mm-hmm.
to stay away from turnkey, and they tend to buy the fixer-uppers, rehab them up a
Right.
bit. You know, because it's a big thing right now, especially like if you
Mm-hmm.
listen to Bigger Pockets and some of those other bigger podcasts that talk about this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
is the Burr method, right? What made you want to go with turnkey versus buying fixer-uppers?
There's nothing wrong with doing that because I got plenty of friends that do the same thing. Here's the problem with that though, is you get caught in a trap, right? It's kind of like the entrepreneur trap, right? We
Right.
become entrepreneurs because we don't have control of our time and our freedom and our money. But when all we find out is we end up owning a job, right? We all of a sudden become trapped inside that business and we just created a job for ourselves. Same thing happens with real estate investors that do active investing. Nothing against it. It's good to make active income, but it's transactional wealth. Like I'm in a high-end mastermind group with some of the top real estate investors in the country. The problem is 80% of them are not financially free. 80% of them make millions of dollars, but they're still, if they stop, they go broke, right? They might have lots of money too, but eventually they run out of money because they don't have their money working for them. They're constantly working for the next deal and reinvesting the profits they make to keep building bigger and bigger and bigger, but there's never a stopping point. That's transactional wealth. Passive wealth says, hey, even if I stop working, I'm okay, right? That's the big key difference. So for me, I like turnkey. Now, some of my friends, they don't mind managing their properties, but others like me say, you know what? I'm a horrible manager. And even if I have a team, I don't want to do it. I'd rather just leverage another property manager to do all the work for me. I buy the property, I collect the rent. That's the extent of my involvement, right? That's what I love to do. And again, I like to get at least a 12% cash to cash return, or meaning if I come out of pocket with a down payment of say $30,000, I want to make at least $300 a month off that. Not including tax benefits where I'm getting tax-free income, not including the fact that the renters are paying down my mortgage for me, and not even including the fact that there's appreciation. When they have leverage, especially when you're using mortgages and things like that, it's not hard for me to make a 30 to 40% per year rate of return on my properties.
I'm curious about turnkeys a lot. I've actually asked
Yeah.
a couple other people. I've reached out to some folks on Bigger Pockets about turnkeys that they're
Mhm.
involved in, because it's actually something that my wife is more interested in versus doing the Burr method, which is
Yeah.
what I was, kind of the route I was going. She wants to do more turnkey investments. So that's actually something we're looking at right now for our next investment. But are you doing turnkey like small multifamily or single family homes, or are you doing like turnkey commercial investments?
More residential, like fourplex and less, right? And there's nothing wrong with,
Okay.
doing single family. I mean, single family, the one problem with that is that you might spend 20, 30, 40,000 or so for a down payment to just do one property. If you've got like a $500,000 sitting around, it can be a kind of a headache, right? So you
Right.
might want to leverage doing a little bit with duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, just to, do less closing, less paperwork, when you're trying to do the mortgage applications and things like that.
Right. Yeah. So, because that's what I'm doing right now is a small residential multifamily
Mhm.
back in Virginia. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious about that, especially with the turnkey. So I'll probably talk to you a little bit more offline about it, about where you're looking and everything, and just pick your brain. But that's
Yeah.
that's pretty good stuff that you get. You're at a point where you're finding turnkey properties that are getting you a 12% cash on cash return. That's
Yeah.
a really good rate of return for a turnkey property. For some people, that's a great rate of return for a fixer upper
Anything.
that they fix up and then they pull their cash back out. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
pretty good rate of return.
It is. But again, I like passive wealth, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the key is that, how can you replace you? How can you replace your income or your
Yeah.
expenses? So then, you work by choice. You work because you want to, not because you have to.
Exactly. That's where I want to be when I retire from the Navy for sure. I only want to work because I want to, not because I have to. So that's one of the things I'm looking at doing too. Like, when I retire, because I also got my real estate license, so I'm going to do that. But I want to be at the point where my income coming from my commissions is strictly for me to invest, because we're living off of my retirement, my pension, and also the passive income that we get from our rental properties. So
Right.
that's why I'm buying rental properties right now, is to supplement my military retirement. And you see, I'm wearing a shirt that says FIRE on it, right? Financial independence,
Mhm.
retire early. But my mindset to FIRE is different than what the FIRE movements is, because I think you can still achieve FIRE by doing it with real estate. So,
Absolutely.
which is why when I first heard you speak, I was like, I got to have Chris on the show, because this guy's speaking the truth. So you invest in residential, small multifamily, turnkey properties. Is
Mhm.
there anything else that you invest in? Do you stay 100% away from the stock market?
I do. 100%
Not
away,
even any
but
REITs, maybe?
no, definitely not REITs. No.
Okay.
Nothing paper. So here's the thing with mutual funds, right? And I used to teach people how to trade stocks and options in the mid 2000s. Even after I retired, I was teaching people how to do it. I learned though that even the people that were actually supposed to be the experts teaching you how to trade stocks and options, when I pulled back the curtain and looked to see what the wizard really looked like, they weren't free either, right? I've even coached people because they've come to me saying, "Hey, I teach people how to trade stocks and options, but I need freedom. Can you help me buy real estate?" Like, that's the key difference, and I've learned over those years that it's different, like it's such a different mentality and a different way of going about doing things. So I might put money in the market at different times. If I see the market tank like an insane amount, yeah, I might gamble with a little bit of money, but I'll never bank on it. It's kind of like when I saw Bitcoin tank, after a couple of years ago, I was like, you know what? I just ripped on Bitcoin on my podcast for hitting 20,000, per Bitcoin. Now I think I might go back and go and buy some at 3,500, and make money off that, but again, that's play money. That's not what that's not what I bank on literally, right? So those kind of things are great. I will put money in like things like we've been buying a lot more gold and silver lately, the actual tangible stuff. Don't buy the actual paper assets. Like don't buy REITs necessarily. Don't go buying like gold ETFs, right? Like, and then you were talking about the FIRE, before, like with that group, like they talk about buying all kinds of ETFs, right? Exchange traded funds, paper representations of an asset. Here's the problem. It's kind of like if you ever seen that Michael Keaton movie called Multiplicity, where he actually clones himself so he can do multiple things and take time off, right? Because he works so hard. And it gets out of hand. Well, the two clones said, "Hey, you know what? We're tired of doing all the work. We're going to make a clone of ourselves." So they clone themselves because it's like a copy of a copy. Like when you keep making Xerox copies, eventually it's faded. So
Yep.
that's what happens there. When you buy paper assets, especially mutual funds and ETFs, they're a copy of a copy. They're not even the real thing. They have their own market, their own price, separate of the assets. So even though gold could increase in price, you could lose money on your gold ETF.
Mm.
So banking on those kind of things, to me, is just gambling. You're not an investor when you're putting money in those things. You're just a gambler, right? Investors buy real assets. That's why we look at real estate. It can even be raw land if you know how to like do things with seller financing, things like that. It could be, things like with gold, although gold you wouldn't cash flow, so it's not something you just buy a ton of. But I think that's a good way to help create an inflation hedge against your cash that's sitting around in savings, right? That's what I usually for. I call it Jerome Powell insurance, right? So if the
Yeah.
Feds decide to keep printing more money, I got some insurance against them,
Yeah. It's a good
which
fallback.
it's a great fallback, right? Bitcoin could be arguably there too, but that's a little bit more chaotic, right? It's like that crazy ex-girlfriend that you never know what she's going to be like from one day to the next because she's bipolar. That's kind of like Bitcoin or the stock market sometimes too. And then the other thing too that I also use as well, I use this to double dip a lot, is I use my life insurance policy. Like
Mm.
I use that as a supercharged tax-free savings account. Not like how most of those insurance guys sell it, where it's like this long-term investment thing. I actually use it as a way to be able to create returns in two places at the same time with my real estate. So I store a lot of cash in there, and then I got some
Yeah.
inflation hedge on that. If I do nothing with that money, if it just sits there, it's better than sitting in my point nothing percent savings account. But I can also use it to go and invest in my real estate and create returns in two places at once.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way to kind of be your own bank as well, right? Because you
Mhm.
you store all that money there, and you can borrow against it, or you can pull it out if needed. That's actually something I'm looking at doing too, is supercharging mine. So I have a variable index life policy that
Mm,
is tied to the S&P 500, but
right.
it's not actually invested in it. You know, the rate of return is based off of that, but it'll never go lower than 2%,
Uh-huh.
which is something I'm a fan of. So
Uh-huh.
I do plan on eventually supercharging that, just dumping a whole bunch of money into it so I can, if in the future I need to borrow from it or just pull from it if I need
Mm,
cash for whatever reason, or for if a good investment or a good deal comes up and I want this, where am I going to get the money from? Oh yeah, I got it right here. You know,
yeah.
so just something good to have in your back pocket.
I used to sell those when I was a traditional
Yeah.
advisor back in the early 2000s before they got
Yeah.
popular. I totally would not use that for real estate investing though. One because they can easily fail. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Even if you get the minimum 2%, you can actually lose money in those things, despite the fact that the market, even though you don't lose off the interest, the costs go up every year in those things. And
Yeah.
so, and you lose the arbitrage effect with real estate when
So
you do that.
what life insurance policy are you using then,
I use whole
you're
life.
throwing your money into? Really,
Yeah, I
whole
use
life?
whole life. I used to
Okay.
think IULs I could do that with it, but then when I realized
Yeah.
I would lose the ability to earn interest twice, and
Huh.
of course, whenever I stress tested my IULs, I'm like, oh crap, like, unless the market smiles at me just right, this thing could blow up on me,
Yeah,
So
that's interesting. And maybe that's why you're the anti-financial advisor, because
yeah,
I always looked at it that the index life insurance policies were better than the whole life insurance policies. I felt like whole life was just like a money sink, like you were just putting your money
yeah,
into it and it wasn't gaining anything.
and it
So
can be. Yeah, if you design it the traditional way, it absolutely can be. Because
yeah,
I taught the same thing. Like as a traditional advisor, I was telling people, don't do whole life. It's a waste of money. You make 1 or 2% a year. That's it. But look at this with the stock market, you can make this. And then after the Y2K, right? Because I came in during Y2K, we were selling VULs at first. Variable universal life, where it got all the market ups and downs. But then after that, because the 90s made it look awesome. Well, then after that, then IUL started becoming like a new trending thing, because they're like, well, if the market does go down, here's some protection, right? But that's what I learned. Like when I started to train other insurance agents about how the IULs worked, then they would ask questions and then start, asking things. And they're like, what about this? What about this? I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess that could be bad. Ooh, yeah, maybe that's not as good as I thought. And so I started to question everything. And you're right, with whole life, it can be a waste of money if you do it the traditional way. Even the whole be your own banker, which is based only on whole life, not IULs, right? The whole be your own banker Nelson Nash thing. Even though, I'll tell you, the most of the ways that those infinite bankers do that still don't do it very well. So that's the problem, is that, even though you might have a good policy, it may not be designed right to get the minimal cost with the maximum gains. So you have to be careful with how those things are designed, because it's all about design.
that's great information, Chris. I appreciate it. It's funny that just the way that you put everything out, it's almost like the opposite of what, you would hear. Obviously, I mean, like you said
Yeah,
it yourself, right? You used to be a traditional financial advisor. It seems like, you're all in with real estate, and to
yeah.
top it off, you're all in to real estate with turnkey real estate, which is kind of the opposite of what most real estate investors will tell you to
Yeah,
do. So it's very interesting, but you're doing very successful with it, obviously, right? You've got a good
yeah,
passive income stream built up.
mhm,
You were able to retire. You're only
yeah,
working now just for the fun of it, for the heck of it,
yeah.
right? And that's exactly where I want to be in a couple of years. So, and I definitely applaud you for getting to where you got today. That's awesome. It's amazing. Where can people find more information about you? Do you have a website or social media? You run a podcast as well, is that correct?
Yeah, I have my podcast, which is called The Chris Miles Money Show, which you can find on iTunes or any podcast app, right? You got plenty of episodes on different topics there. But then, yeah, you can find me on moneyripples.com. Social media, Money Ripples, you can look it up. It's there on Facebook. And yeah, I even have an Instagram account now with Chris Miles and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how to use it, but people I hire know how to use it. So that's pretty cool.
No, that's fantastic. So I'll make sure I have all the links to your social media accounts, your website, and your podcast in the show notes below. So for anybody that's listening to this episode, definitely check it out. You can just open up the show notes, or if you're watching this on YouTube, look at the video description, and you can check out all the links that we have for Chris and learn a little bit more about the anti-financial advisor, and maybe you can build your own anti-financial plan. Chris, I definitely want to talk more offline with you when we can, and I want to stay in touch. This was a really phenomenal information. Thanks for coming on.